Welcome to Energy Stew. This is Peter Roth, your host. And I'd like to ask you, how contemplative are you? How much do you think about that? Well, we're going to talk about it. And we're going to contemplate it, actually, during the show, because that's part of the beingness of contemplation. And to do that, we're going to talk to a man who I have incredible esteem for, a man who's been on the show a number of times before. And I was so happy to see this new book of his called The Art of Contemplation. And we're speaking with the author, Richard Rudd. Richard, welcome to Energy Stew.
Thank you, Peter. It's wonderful to be here and see you again.
And, you know, contemplation is something that a lot of people think they understand, that word and what it means. And you're bringing it to a much deeper place that I'm so fascinated by, because you're making it an art. And how can we define it as an art?
It's an art because, to me, it's an art because it's not a science. You know, it's not something you can approach in a linear fashion. And so it's not a word that you're going to easily pin down its true meaning. So for me, it's one of those words that is used in many traditions. And so it can mean many things to many people. So in my approach to it, I have kept it as broad as possible. And I think it has a generosity to it. So I think that's really, that's the essence of my answer, that contemplation is something that's vast, you know, and we could say what it isn't, which you know, is it's not a form of concentrated thinking, you know, which is
Right.
the Western often understood meaning of it, but it has many different meanings in many different traditions, and it's a wonderful art to explore. And many of us are already exploring it, perhaps without even using that word or thinking of ourselves as contemplatives. So, yeah.
In reading the book, what came to my mind immediately was that it creates sacred space. That when we're contemplative, we're actually operating within a sacred space to find inner clarity in many different ways. And fortunately, in your book, you get to many different ways of creating clarity in our lives. And so there's mental, emotional, physical, and you have different ways of looking at those that we can then address our lives in a more open fashion, to allow ourselves to be clearer in each moment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, see, for me, contemplation is about harvesting wisdom. You know, and wisdom is everywhere. It's everywhere at all times available to us, and we are, in a way, we are a form of wisdom, and our cells have wisdom. Our physical body has wisdom.
I was just thinking of that too, that our bodies are much wiser than we give them credit for.
Yeah.
And the more that we can tune in to the wisdom coming from them, the more we can help them.
Yeah, absolutely. And the more we can come in tune with the seasons, with the turning of the stars and in the firmament, and greater cycles, you know, so that we can take our role in the play and the drama of our life perfectly, because we're in exactly the right place in the right time, which we always are, but we know it when we're in the space of contemplation. We know it. And so we are resonant with that knowing, and it creates a different kind of life when you come from that place.
That's beautiful. Resonant with that knowing is a beautiful way to look at it. And so what I was thinking of is to be resonant as the seasons change, like they're changing now, and to find that inner space in you to align with the changing seasons, just as we do, for instance, with the change during the day from dawn to dusk. And, you know, experiencing dusk has always been magnificent to me. And I've been in places where people gather together to watch the sunset and be in dusk together. And there's some magic about that.
Absolutely. I mean, as you'll know, in the end of my little book, it is a section where I have put forward proposed contemplations, contemplative paths, and in many different ways, things for people to think about, and practical ways to employ it. So, you know, those times of day that we often miss, like dusk. We miss it often because it's a very busy time of day for many of us, because we're coming in from work and we're tired, and so we miss the falling of night often, and they're so precious, those times, if we linger in them, because that's when the wisdom starts to kind of come alive in us. So there's a kind of soft discipline to contemplation, where it's the discipline of finding pauses, you know, finding pauses in the day, and lingering in those pauses. And a pause can be very short. You know, it can be, you know, the shortest pause I know is a sigh. You know, it's like a
Right.
that's the shortest pause, you know. And then there are longer and longer pauses. And there are also forms of sighing, you know, where we relax and we let go and we just drift or sit. Or sometimes a pause can be a dialogue or a discussion, or it can be having a drink, but in a certain way, in a way where you're not kind of rushing and you're drinking, and you might be having your tea or your glass of wine or whatever it is, and you're not doing something else at the same time. You're just doing that and you're just enjoying that. That's a perfect pause.
Right.
So the art of contemplation is an art because it's making an art out of your life by enjoying every kind of moment that you can. And that's the harvest, by harvesting the natural pauses. And I know what people are thinking when I say this. I don't have time to pause. And there's such an irony in that thought, because the irony is, when you find time to pause, time expands and your day expands, and actually you find that things get done in a much better rhythm and order and flow, because you're pausing, because you're actually slowing down inwardly, which means that you are responding to things more clearly and more cleanly.
And tuning.
Yeah. And so you don't waste time making mistakes.
Right.
And so you don't go up blind alleys, and you don't trip over that thing on the floor, and you don't spill your drink, and all, you know, all these things. I mean, you make your mistakes, of course, but you don't, you know, you're in a flow, you're in a pattern of flow that is different, and your life is a lot more enjoyable. So
And the idea of pausing is the as you say, it's the allowance of aligning with the inner. And if we can keep that in mind and say, wait a minute, I need my inner to catch up with my outer.
yeah,
So I'm going to pause. And it happens. And all of a sudden we get insights, we get light shining that we didn't see before, and can pivot.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, as you know, I love threes and trinities. So in my book are, you know, always trinities. And so you have pausing, and then the second layer is pivoting. And a pivot is an emotional realization of some form. So the pause is often a mental, because, you know, you have to kind of think about it in order to pause, and then you open the space. And what's going to happen in the space, we don't know. But if we're lucky, perhaps a pivot may occur, you know. So and out of maybe, I don't know, 50 pauses, maybe one pivot will occur. And a pivot is a spontaneous seeing of something emotional that we hadn't seen before. So in other words, it might be because we're in the flow, we're in the discipline of pausing, instead of kind of launching into a kind of defense where we feel someone has said something that's upset us, instead of launching into that defense, there's a sort of a little mini pause before we respond. And in that pause, suddenly there's a revelation of like, I'm about, I'm not going to go down this road. I'm not going to waste all this energy trying to defend myself. And we just rest, and a pivot, something inside us completely shifts and turns around, and we no longer fall victim to something, to a pattern,
Right,
a
so
pattern that then propagates the difficulty.
right. So instead of outwardly thinking of the effort we have to make to solve a problem, we pause to allow the insight to let the problem, in a sense, reveal its solution to us in ways we hadn't expected.
Exactly, and it always creates some kind of breakthrough inside us. But and the beauty of contemplation is that they're always unexpected. You don't know when they're going to happen. You can't create it. There's no formula. That there's
Right.
no official training in how to contemplate. And my book won't do that, and I'm certainly not going to offer any trainings in how, because it's something we have to we all can do it already.
It's just allowing.
Yeah.
It's that.
Yeah.
And I've done in so many shows recently. Everybody lately is talking about Wu Wei, and Wu Wei is a Chinese Taoist expression about becoming effortless, and just experiencing what's in the moment, and not trying to think around it. But and so the book, there's so much in your book of beautiful words, beautiful understandings that spark so much insight. And so your book can be read very contemplatively.
Yeah. Well, I hope that's the way it's been written, with pauses, and simplicity, and so that you can enjoy it, and there's no pressure because it's not very long and it's not very hard to read. And I think I hope for people it will be a companion that they keep returning to and contemplating and going back, because in a way sometimes, as you know, I've written some big books in my time.
Yes.
And so it was a real pleasure for me to write a short book, but to condense all my wisdoms into sort of few words, and then really make those words and their order correct, so that they feel really, there's not a single wasted word in that book.
And I actually expected that from you.
Thank you.
And it was such a pleasure to just start reading your book, because I knew I was in for a great journey, and not a long one, but a deep one, and extremely rewarding. What I've done is I've taken a lot of notes from, even though it doesn't do justice, it's easier for me, instead of rereading the whole book each time, is to see where I highlighted and what stands out to me as an easy for my brain to comprehend very quickly. And so there are so many things you talk about in here, like contemplation is to create a state of profound equilibrium. It's so beautiful. And that's how we want to live our lives, feeling balanced, but it's an inner balance. It's not, because on the outer, we're always going to get shoved and kicked around. And, life outer is not so obviously balanced, although I think everything is in divine order. It doesn't appear that way. Yeah. So in order to find the divine order in our own reality, in our own lives, is to let it reveal itself through contemplation. And so that's what this is, an opportunity, is to think differently. It really is life-changing, I think, to read this book, because you really get to have the language, just like Gene Keys, is a language about ourselves.
Mm.
And for the audience, you're the author of Gene Keys, which is a book of profound understanding about life. And so, but it creates a language that we can then identify with in our own consciousness to allow to lead us. Our language leads us. And thankfully, for people like you offering that language to lead us by, we can rest more in those profound words rather than, fight our confused minds.
Well, I hope so. I hope so. I mean, that is definitely the purpose of writing such a book, is as a reminder for all of us, including myself, that and a book that's small enough to kind of put in your pocket and return to for those reminders.
Right. But I think it's not as passing, as fleeting as that. I think that there are lessons in here that I'm not going to lose so fast.
Good.
This is so many beautiful understandings, beautiful ideas. Like the whole idea of lingering, to me, meant a lot. And I actually used it today. I was at a place where I had about 5 or 10 minutes free time in a store that I really like to be in, and I was hanging out there, and this woman said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "No, I'm just lingering." And I said, "And that's a different word than loitering."
A different intent.
Right. And so I really was so happy with myself to be able to have that language of what I was doing, which was admiring the environment I was in and just absorbing and whatever it had to offer.
Well, lingering's lovely because it's a lovely word as well in English, but it means to stay, to stay on when you've finished something. It's to take the pause again, to harvest the pause that lies at the end, like at the end of a film, to sit and be the last one to leave. There's something precious in that. I mean, we have to be careful that we're not all kind of competing in lingering, because no one will leave.
Right. I wasn't loitering to go into the store. I actually went in there to pick up something for my son. So I did something.
So,
and then I just said, I'm going to breathe this store.
Exactly.
It was.
And I make the point in my book that, it's often when we linger at the end of a meal or something that actually that's when people put their guard down and the real treasures come out.
Yes.
And the real conversations often happen and at the end after things have finished. So it's really important not to rush headlong to the next thing in life and to give a little bit of time, and obviously you don't want to outstay your welcome as well. So you have to apply sensitivity at the same time. So that's why contemplation's an art again, because,
And yet some people will say, well, we're really talking about mindfulness. And it might be, but to me, what you've done is taken mindfulness and made it more sacred. Because mindfulness is just being aware. Okay, I'm aware. But now I want to be aware more inwardly and have a much more open sense of what mindfulness can bring me.
Yeah, I think also contemplation, it doesn't in any way compete with mindfulness. In fact, it includes mindfulness, but it also, I think, extends it. It's a bit more creative than mindfulness and proactive, and it's a bit more naughty. Mindfulness is a little bit kind of square,
yes.
and And contemplation is a bit playful. You play, like we were just talking about lingering, and you get to play with your life. So you enter it with a playful spirit, and you don't take yourself too seriously. So there is that kind of paradox in it. We are doing something sacred, but we're also at times doing it in a kind of slightly irreverent way. It's a paradox. Again, that brings us back to that's why it's an art, because an art is something that straddles a paradox. A paradox can't be resolved by the human mind. So we have to enter it. We have to become it. We have to imbibe it and embody it.
And in the book, you talk about humor and how necessary it is to find, even in the darkest circumstances. I have a friend who's an amputee, and he has the most gallows humor of anyone I know. And it's hysterical to be around him. And he makes jokes about his missing leg. And, and it's if we can do that in so many parts of us that, we identify with hardship or something, something lacking, and be able to find humor in ourselves.
Yeah, it's essential. It's so essential, especially in spiritual circles, where people can fall into the trap of taking themselves a bit too seriously, and taking the programs or processes a little bit too seriously. And so contemplation brings back that chuckle, that belly laugh, and it's usually at ourselves.
So I think what it means is that contemplation is also about not having too many opinions.
Yeah.
The opinions get in our way.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the pivoting part. You see, when you suddenly pivot round and you look at yourself and you see the opinions or an opinion you're holding, like I mentioned, it's like it could be a defensive one, and that opinion causes you so much difficulty.
Yes.
Because you're having to support it and hold it up all the time. And so when you suddenly see that, you go, oh, and you can keep the opinion as well in the contemplation. So you can keep it, but you won't keep it so tensely.
Yeah.
So it's not about having no opinions. It's just about holding them loosely.
Or not having an opinion about your opinion.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so we have, you do have, I love all these 3 different words that you attach to different things. Like you have 3 techniques and 3 confirmations. And I love them. Insight, the confirmations are insight, breakthrough, and epiphany. And that makes great sense that we're, because you're moving us through the process with these different words that you.
Yeah. So insight is the mental, is when is when a pause opens up and there's a mental insight that takes place, and that opens something in our mind. And then breakthrough is when it moves deeper, and the pause or the process of contemplation moves even deeper in us through pivoting, through an experience that shifts us, and that's a breakthrough. It's an emotional change. It's more powerful than an insight in a way, because it shifts.
It's kind of like a pivot too.
Exactly what it is, and it opens our heart more. So the insight opens our mind, and the breakthrough opens our heart.
Oh, great.
And then the final one, the third one, which is the kind of the great prize, is epiphany. And epiphany is when a number of breakthroughs have gone on occurring, and our heart begins to open more and more and more. And then the third component of pausing, pivoting, and then merging comes in. And merging is the one where we begin to merge with life and with the environment, but we merge consciously. We don't lose ourself.
It's a flow of merging.
Yes. So we begin, like I mentioned in the book about the Sufis, using this word, the friend, for everything, the friend. They talk about the friend, and it could be your enemy that's your friend, or it could be the chair that's your friend, the friend.
The everything relationship.
Yeah, and it's a way of bringing everything in your life closer to you. Instead of pushing things away, you allow things in. And that's what changes. That's what creates epiphanies, when we let things in deeply. And an epiphany is a cellular phenomenon. It is a sort of DNA illumination that takes place
The
inside us, and it
oneness,
can go
actually.
on. Yeah,
It's the oneness that allows everything to become part of that one.
exactly. So that's the prize, really. It's the state of being.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's wonderful. So we're getting near the end of the show, and I'm excited that we had a chance to explore this with you. And how can people follow through on this?
Well, obviously, buy the book, which is coming out very soon, and
The Art of
the
Contemplation.
Art of Contemplation. Yeah, and also if you know, you can work with that book over time, and you, if that kind of turns you on, you can also take a little pivot and come and have a look at the Gene Keys, which is this sort of my other big wisdom, into which contemplation lives very beautifully and has a life. So you can employ that in a much, you know, in a huge playground. As you know, you'll know the Gene Keys. So
Yes.
all kinds of pathways of
Well, I think Art of Contemplation, for people who don't know you, is an introduction to
yeah,
want to find out more
perfect.
about what you've created in this life.
Yeah, and if you like art, if you like it, and it's kind of working for you, then yeah, come a bit deeper,
Great.
and yeah,
Richard Rudd, thank you so much for being a guest on Energy Stew.
that's absolute pleasure.
And this is Peter Roth, your host of Energy Stew at prn.fm. I can be reached at peter@heartriver, HEART river.org. I'd love to hear from you, and thanks so much for listening.